You never clap at the beginning because I should leave now. Then I come out positive, right? I'm going to probably drive this gentleman back here nuts and move around a little bit. Everyone can hear me fine with the microphone here? Okay, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to give a little background here. And as I give background, I'm going to put my contact information up there. I'm going to have handouts throughout the day. I'm not going to be handing out an actual printout of this presentation. Don't feel like you got to take a note on every slide. If anyone is interested in getting the core program I'm going to be presenting, jot my email address down, give me a business card, and I'll make sure I send it to you. I'm going to probably have to remove some of the photos and different things like that just to keep it down to a manageable file size. But again, if you're interested in this electronically, if you're interested in any of the handout materials I'm going to be providing electronically, I can send those to you. So by matter of introduction, that's me. I've been in the insurance industry for about 17, 18 years. And this whole topic of work zone liability, how I got involved in that is how probably a lot of us got involved in a lot of things that we kind of tend to maybe specialize on, and that's baptism by fire. Working in the construction industry, working in the insurance industry, you see a lot of bad things that occur out there. And what I learned very early on in my career is from a lawsuit standpoint, from a litigation standpoint, work zone related incidents are some of the worst ones that I've seen out there. And so I started digging into this a little bit more and really trying to understand better what's going on out there as to why we're having such situations. A little bit difference on this topic today is I'm not going to be focusing as much on the worker safety end of things. And that's not that I am not a safety professional. It's not that I don't believe in protecting workers. This is just a different topical area. It's more on how far south can an accident go when somebody's injured in a work zone. So when I talk about liability, just to get us all on a level playing field, there's two big pieces of liability. A company is alleged to or they may have caused either property damage or bodily injury to another entity. That's to oversimplify it. So that's the piece of the puzzle that I'm going to be focusing on today is the liability piece and really kind of trying to show you where this stuff goes, how bad it can get. Now, just by a show of hands so I know who's in the room, how many contractor personnel do we have in the room? Okay, we've got a few here. How about insurance? Got a few. What else? How about a governmental agency, DOT? Okay. Is it DOT specifically? Okay, great. Glad you're in here because I'm going to be talking about DOT. Not in a bad way. We're all partners in this thing, okay? Anyone else that I missed as far as occupation? Very good. Going to be very valuable. In fact, Jim and I talked a few weeks ago. I called you out of the blue. I talked on the phone for a while. I'm sorry? Law enforcement. Excellent. Appreciate you being in here. Surveying. Okay. Did I miss anybody else? Utilities. Great. Safety. Okay, perfect. We have a very good mixture in here. I'm going to get rolling, and I want you to interject. I want you to ask questions. We can go off on any tangent we want in this thing. We've got an hour and 20 minutes, and this gentleman's responsibility is to throw something at me if we're at an hour and 10, and it looks like I'm not shutting up. Okay, so you got to remind me because my watch might die. And I like talking, okay, so I can tend to go a little long here. But let's jump into this. What's this session all about? Hopefully you're not dealing with a mess like that out in a work zone situation. But what I'm going to talk about today is the reality of work zone liability. Really what happens out there. We're going to go through cases. This is not going to be made up stuff. I'm going to show you how nasty this stuff can get. And we've got folks in the room who have seen this stuff. How many of you have been involved in or directly involved in some significant work zone related injuries, fatalities? How many of you have had to investigate those? Not a good situation. Tend to be very ugly. It gets really interesting out there sometimes. So I'm going to focus on that. This right here is going to be a big piece of what I'm going to hammer home today, is what are we doing before an incident happens? What are we doing to protect ourselves against any allegation that we did something wrong? So there's going to be a big focus on the documentation piece. What are we doing ahead of time? Not just what are we doing after the fact. That is important, though, what happens after the fact. You're going to have a very interesting window of time to try and get some very critical information together. I'm going to hit high points on that as best as I can, and I believe me, I could be up here for 4 hours talking on this stuff, but we've got an hour, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly here. We are going to talk about a real-life accident review, and I'm going to show you some photos. And this is an actual case that was settled out of court, and you'll see why cases settle out of court instead of going to trial. But these get bad. These get very ugly sometimes. This is a photo from that accident. We're going to be talking about this at the end. I'm going to actually go through kind of a summary of the case from a pros and cons standpoint against the contractor that was involved. Okay? And notice something here. What's that speed limit? 40 miles an hour. This is not an interstate project. This is not high speed. And notice that. $6 million out-of-court settlement. And I'm going to show you why it got to $6 million. And I'm going to show you why it didn't go to court. Because there wasn't enough in place to properly protect the entities involved. Okay? So let's start with reality here. I said I want to make sure we get on the same page here, and this is what happens out there, right? You wonder what the heck people are reading when they're going down the roadway, right? You've got signs, you've got barricades, you've got all this stuff happening out there, and what are the folks in the vehicles doing? What do you see them doing? Cell phone, right? Reading? What was it? Lunch. Makeup, lunch, and cell phone at the same time, right? You see intoxicated drivers out there? Never happens, right? Especially night work never happens, right? Again, we're dealing with a lot of situations here, and when it all comes down to what the bad part about the public is, that's what they're reading on your signs. You're making me late. I'm going to miss my plane. I'm going to get to work late. I'm going to have a heck of a commute because all that darn construction's in my way. So the stage is set to have a bunch of fingers being pointed at every entity involved in a work zone project. They're not considering that you're improving their roads, that you're making their life better. Their commute's going to get better. The road's going to get better. That's not the mindset. The mindset is you're slowing them down. You're in my way. I'm in a bad mood, and real bad stuff happens after that, right? For those reasons and that mindset that's occurring out there, we got to look at what's going to happen. When there is an accident that occurs in a work zone, the contractors are going to get blamed. The DOT is also going to get blamed, right? Any entity involved in that situation is going to get blamed. You're going to have vehicles and equipment with your name and your logo on it. And how many drivers get out of the vehicle, if they make it, after an accident and go, yeah, my bad, that was my fault, right? I'm the one who caused this accident, it had nothing to do with you guys. What happens? What's the driver do? Finger pointing. You nailed it on the head there, too. You're going to get blamed for everything you did wrong, failed to do completely right. There's a difference, but there's the same thing there. And we're going to walk through how critical it is to do as much right as you can, as often as you can, and as consistently as you can. When there's breakdowns in that consistency, we see the ramifications of it when things go to litigation. The defense that you have as the entity involved in that, you've got allegations of bad things that you did or failed to do correctly, is going to come down to how well you managed it based on the conditions that were present. And that is a key. People don't like documentation. It's a pain in the neck. It's some extra work sometimes you got to do. But after we go through some of the stuff here in the next half an hour, hour or so, you're going to find that this is the message that I'm hammering home. This is what's going to save you from all those allegations. Because sometimes it does get very, very bad. Now, there's no sound here, but this is just a little video clip. Got a bad situation there, right? You think we have a dead person or persons? If not, we have some seriously messed up people, right? Now, this doesn't look like there's a lot of congestion. It looks like not a huge highway interstate type system. Obviously, there was some kind of activity going on. We've got some traffic control cones set up, that kind of thing. After an incident like this happens, and there were several hands that went up that people have been involved in a bad work zone accident, what is really the primary objective, especially when you've got a large congested road? What's the primary objective typically as far as speed goes to have occur after an incident like this happens? Okay, what was it? Okay, they want the traffic moving again. Does everyone agree with that? We've got potentially a road shut down, and we've got thousands or hundreds of thousands of vehicles that aren't going to be able to get through this thing. So there's a weird dynamic that occurs here, because this is not a building site where an accident happens and we can cordon it off and tape it off and take the time to do an investigation. You've got a window of time to try and collect critical information, don't you? And it's not easy to do. Now, this is a simple situation here. Bad result. It gets a little bit worse. And I want you to notice it here. Hang on.
Los Angeles, California.
Wow.
Just before dawn.
That'll wake you up.
In the fast lane of a busy freeway. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Notice the cone sitting there.
The empty vehicle gets blasted by a Mustang at nearly 70 miles an hour. The force of the collision rockets the van several hundred feet. Inside the Mustang, a young couple is too stunned to get out.
Paramedics are coming!
A news cameraman calls for help.
Multiple injuries. I need CHP ASAP.
But the couple's nightmare has just begun. The car swerves to avoid their Mustang and skids out of control. 5 cars are now involved in the pileup, and the man and the woman are still sitting ducks. The cameraman waves his camera light as a warning to oncoming traffic, but it doesn't work. The couple is battered in another violent collision.
That's fun, right? We got a nasty situation there. Video goes on a little bit further, and actually there was very minor injuries that occurred in that, which is extremely lucky, right? But did you notice the traffic control devices in that video? Do you think that had there been several people killed or several people seriously injured outside of the property damage, do you think there's going to be some involvement of that contracting entity that had the cones out there? If you're a traffic control subcontractor, if you're the DOT, yeah, I think people are going to get brought in. And here's the whole thing is when an incident occurs here, there's going to be a lot of activity. You're going to have emergency response. The demonstration they did out in the parking lot yesterday, the stuff's real. It's going to happen. There's going to be media involved. You're going to have law enforcement. And this is very difficult because you want to get the roadway open very quickly, so it is very challenging to investigate an accident like that as well as you'd like to. There's going to be all kinds of communications, internal with your company or your entity, external communication. You're going to try and do the best investigation you can. And again, the hands that have been involved in investigating something like that, just let me see them again. Difficult to do, nearly impossible to do, nearly impossible to try and figure out who the heck was a witness. Did you get all the witnesses? Do you have all the pieces that broke? Are you able to document skid marks? Are you able to tell exactly what happened? The message that I'm trying to send here is this is going to happen at some point, right? It's going to happen. We're going to walk through some cases. And the whole issue here is this is my message. What you do, and I say you, if you're the contractor, if you're any entity involved in that, what you do on a regular basis prior to an incident occurring is going to be very, very valuable. I'm going to put this in perspective with a different line of construction. You got some utility contractors in here, correct? Contractors deal with underground utility damages quite a bit, right? You're digging in the dirt, you hit a utility. And one of the most frustrating things when you're trying to help a contractor defend against the fact that the utility's saying they lost, use for, a week and all this stuff involved, and you get the investigation happening, and you get a bunch of pictures of what after a cable's been cut? You get about 20 pictures of a cable that's cut, and all you got is pictures of the hole in the ground with the cut cable. That is very frustrating when you're trying to help an entity, because what don't you have pictures of? You don't have pictures of the markings on the ground before you excavate it. You don't have pictures of what's surrounding it. And so it's only valuable to a point. 20 pictures of a hole in the ground with a cut cable are worth maybe half a picture from 20 feet away of the layout. Everyone agree with that? Same exact concept we're talking about with work zones. What you do ahead of time is going to be so much more valuable than what you maybe do right afterwards. Okay, so let's just start moving through here. Who's going to get sued? Everybody's going to get sued, right? It's the shotgun, machine gun approach. Let's shoot everybody potentially involved, and let's figure it out afterwards. Now, for the DOT or whoever the authority having jurisdiction is, does the DOT get sued? Okay. So if the DOT gets sued, or whoever the other authority having jurisdiction or owner might be, and you get handed these lawsuit papers, Mr. DOT representative, what happens with these? What do you do immediately? Okay, guess what? We've got an agreement with the contractor here. It's the general contractor on the job. You're going to take this. You're going to defend me. Now, what are you going to do if you're the general contractor and you've got a traffic control sub and maybe a milling sub or whatever it might be? You're going to walk down the line here and you're going to go like this, and you're going to go like this, and you're going to go like this. And this gets into a very interesting situation from a litigation standpoint because you potentially have 5, 10, who knows how many entities involved in a lawsuit. By the way, this is an actual lawsuit I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to give it to you. I'll talk about it. Everyone that potentially is going to be involved is going to get brought into that thing at some point or another. In the discovery process and litigation, you're going to try and find out who's involved. It's part of the discovery process. So a lot of activity is going to be going on here. Now I'm going to talk about common allegations in lawsuits. I'm sure you guys have seen other ones. I'm just going to highlight the ones that I tend to see over and over again. As far as what are the allegations of you as the contracting entity, you as the DOT, you as maybe subcontractors on that project. What am I going to allege if my spouse just got killed going through your work zone? What am I going to hook up with my attorney and say you did wrong? Here's some of the most common ones I see. This one comes up, correct me if I'm wrong, call me out. You're not complying with existing work zone standards. You're not in compliance with the manual on uniform traffic control devices. You're not in compliance with your own written traffic control plan. Does that come out as an allegation? Yeah, you're not following the plan. You're not following the known standards that are out there. A lot of that leads to this: improper or ineffective placement of devices, number of devices, visibility of devices, spacing of devices. Basically, it comes down to the failure to effectively warn the traveling public. You didn't do a good job in warning my wife that she needed to slow down and merge. It's a big allegation against the contractor, right? Improper placement of vehicles and equipment. Improper posted speed for conditions. Now, if I'm the contractor, how do I control that? I'm not the authority having jurisdiction. You guys ever see that speed limits aren't posted where they probably should be for a certain work zone situation? Anyone run into that? And I'm sitting there going, I'm ABC Construction. I got hired by the state to do this job. I can't control it. It's going to come out. You're going to be brought in. It's going to be alleged that you could have taken more action to try and reduce speed. And it's not easy to do, is it? It's very difficult to do. Failure to inspect. That's a very critical allegation, meaning that you did not do your due diligence in inspecting the work zone to make sure it was properly set up so my spouse didn't get killed. Big allegations. Poor visibility. This one comes up. See this one a lot? Standing water. Allegations that the roadway was not constructed properly. So weird things come up out of this. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk through some basic pieces, elements of a civil lawsuit here. This is about a half of the original lawsuit paperwork that came in, the civil action, okay? And I'm going to highlight some things here. This is a fatality accident. It occurred in March of 2006. This is a company I work with, okay? Good outfit. They do a lot of good things right. A lot of bad stuff happens out there. Happened in March of 2006. These papers were received by the contractor. In this case, it was a Department of Transportation project. The DOT was not sued. They went directly after the general contractor. They're the ones doing the work. Papers were received in November of 2006. How long could that delay have been in most states? Okay, it depends. A lot of states have a 2-year statute of limitations. Some have a 3-year statute of limitations. And what that basically is the amount of time from when an injury occurs to when you can file suit for that injury. Now, this to me is actually pretty close. Do you think there's a strategy sometimes from legal folks? Is there any attorneys in here? I'm not going to bash any attorneys. I just like to ask the question. Okay, I'm going to bash them now. I'm kidding. Strategy might be what? But what's the strategy? Let's hold off and not file until the last day the statute runs out. And that does happen. Let's wait 2 years because of what? What do you have in place? Do you have changeover in personnel? What were you doing? Here, I'm going to put you on the spot. What were you doing last Wednesday at 3 p.m. in the afternoon? You're what? You remember exactly which one it was? Exactly what you're doing at 3 o'clock? That's what I'm getting at. Imagine that 2 years down the road, and you're trying to have somebody recall the work zone situation. The project's done. They've maybe moved on. It's going to get very interesting here. I'm going to talk about the damages, the alleged negligence. I'm going to review what are called interrogatories, and I'm not going to review all of them, and I'm going to highlight a few things. What is an interrogatory? It's a what? Some really ugly questions, right? They're really important, ugly questions, and you're going to get handed a stack about this thick of questions, and you're going to have to answer those questions as part of the litigation process. Here's a scary note, and this is not made up. There's been 12 members of the public that have been killed in this contractor's work zones since January 1st of 2006. This is a good entity. They do a lot of things well. Right now, there's 4 of those that are in litigation. One of them is the one I'm talking about. There's the potential for, we think the potential for another 5 to go to litigation. But you don't know if it's going to happen for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. They happen to be in a state that has a 2-year statute of limitations. So, this is a scanned copy of it. Obviously, took names out to protect the innocent or guilty, but here's the date, March 28th. Due to road construction being conducted in the area, the left lane on the interstate was closed. This was the contracting entity. No warning signs or visible markings were present to warn the deceased driver that the left lane was going to be closed. Is that a big allegation? For a DOT project, and this is a large one, you think it's a load of you-know-what? Yeah. No warning signs or markings were present? Okay. Any warning cones that may have been present prior to the deceased person's approach to the road were either not present or had been moved out of the way so that a large piece of construction equipment could be parked in the closed lane. There was either no warning or an adequate warning that the left lane was closed. The vehicle collided with a piece of construction equipment, and the driver was killed, and the passenger was seriously injured. So now we've got a lawsuit due to the death and injury that's being filed by the mother and the spouse. And these are the major allegations here. It's caused by the negligence of ABC Construction. Failure to warn of the lane being closed, improperly parking a large piece of construction equipment in the left lane, using inadequate warning devices to warn the left lane being closed, other acts or omissions which we're going to dig up in the process over the next 2 years. This thing is scheduled to go to trial in September of 2008. We're not even close to the actual litigation taking place. Okay? So, I'm just going to highlight some of the interrogatories. How many of you have dealt with interrogatories and had to answer them? Wow, I'm just going to shut up because you guys know exactly where I'm going with this, right? It's ugly. The kind of questions are, you describe to me all warning signs, traffic control devices, everything that was present 1 mile west of said accident site immediately prior to the accident. You tell me what was there. In regards to that answer, you state the name, address, and everything about any entity involved in deciding what was supposed to be there. That is called pulling other people into the fold, right? Describe all the warning signs, stripes, buttons, barricades that were hit and or moved by the vehicle. Describe all the contract agreements, other written agreements, specifications, traffic control plans that had to do with this thing within 5 miles of the accident site. Did the actual placement of those devices meet the traffic control plan? Describe any and all changes that were made. There's never changes that are made, right? The original traffic control plan you get for a work zone situation stays exactly the same from when it was designed, right? No, it doesn't. Things get modified all the time. Do you think it's going to be important as to how those modifications are documented? How they were approved? Was everything approved? Was everything documented? This stuff's going to come out. Now here's where it gets scary. This happened in March of 2006. This is updated information from our claims folks as of July of this summer here. We've got experts involved in this. There's attorneys involved. And looking at the whole ball of wax here, basically what this is saying is that March 28th is the accident date. March 7th, and then 5 days prior to the accident, the DOT found no deficiencies in the area where the accident occurred. This date and that is important because what that is, and I'm going to talk about this later, is the required inspection that the DOT mandates. It's every 14 days, once during the day, once during the night. So the point here is there was no deficiencies found. But the most current inspection as far as the DOT requirement is concerned was done how many days prior to the fatality? 5 days. Is 5 days a long time? Yeah, it's a huge issue, okay? And believe me, that's going to come out. The police report indicates that the factors contributing to the accident were that the driver failed to drive in a single lane and failed to control his speed. We have law enforcement in here, correct? Just show of hands. Have you done a lot of investigation of work zone accidents? I'm going to ask you a very pointed question, and just be very honest, or not. Have you been through work zone training as far as, like, how to figure out the length of a taper, the number of barrels, the placement of signs? This, I'm putting you on the spot. Right. You actually answered that exactly the way I hoped you'd answer it. I don't know if everyone heard them. If I heard you right, you said most law enforcement officers have not specifically been trained in that. So what I've seen oftentimes is the accident report might indicate something that is very negative toward the contractors. It doesn't look like there's enough barrels out here. Now, does the accident report, police report, carry a lot of weight? A tremendous amount of weight. There's a message here. We've got to be able to show beyond relying on the police report as to what's going on, because sometimes it's not always accurate. I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, that's kind of what the message was there. Now, here's fun stuff. This is like a Jerry Springer situation gone bad, because the more I hear about this guy's background and everything, I'm going, holy cow, how could the contractor lose this case? More stuff in this guy's systems that would impair driving than, I mean, they've had toxicology expert after toxicology expert. The guy had all kinds of prescription, non-prescription medications in his system. We're sitting here going, this one should go away. Now, our legal counsel's assessment of the situation here is the defense counsel is confident that a reasonable jury will place all or an overwhelming majority of the liability on the driver. At this point, we say that there's probably a 70% chance the jury's going to attribute zero liability to the contractor. Notice I underlined this. Reasonable jury. Has anyone sat on a jury? And I'm not saying you're not reasonable, okay? But there's different venues in the country, and there's venues that have they're known to be like plaintiffs' bar locations. They're known to be judicial hellholes, meaning that oftentimes it is swayed way against the contracting entity in this case. Very pro-plaintiff. So you got to take this into consideration. 70% chance we're going to win this one, and look where we're sitting. 70% chance that we think this is going to go away. There is $1 million sitting in reserve right now, and to date there's been over $150,000 spent on legal fees, experts, toxicology, the whole ball of wax. And we're not even close to litigation. This is reality. This is one of those accident and work zone situations that should go away, and it's not. And even if it does go away, we've got a chunk of change spent, and we've already got this much in reserve that is planned to be spent for this litigation to take place. Okay? Gets ugly. Does anyone have any questions about that? I wanted to show you a real case. I'm going to show you more as we go through, and toward the end I'm going to specifically talk about that $6 million one. The whole point here is we all know bad stuff happens out there. I don't know if I've got the most updated figures, but last ones I could find, over 1,000 people died in highway work zones, last year. 85% of those fatalities were motorists. I'm not taking away from the worker safety element. It's just not the subject I'm talking about today. But if I'm saying 85% of that number of fatalities, I'm saying very high likelihood that there was litigation involved, and very high likelihood that there was lawsuits and contractors involved. Sound fair? A lot of bad stuff happens out there. I just like showing this. It's a short video.
The construction workers often at greatest risk for injuries and death on the job are people we pass by nearly every day. More than 700 people are killed and another 37,000 are injured each year in roadside work zones. Road workers face perilous conditions on a daily basis. Often their only protection is a reflective vest, a few warning signs, and the rubber cones some call the thin orange line between life and death. Drivers rarely give them a second thought.
Think about it. How would you like it if someone drove through your workplace at 65 miles an hour?
Public
I just think that's a cool
campaigns have met
commercial.
with some.
That's why I like showing that. No, but the point here is there has been a lot of activity as far as trying to lessen the danger to construction workers. Different states have done different things. There's the doubling of the fines, right, for speeding through a work zone. Anyone from the state of Illinois? Okay. What's all over the interstate in the state of Illinois? Hit a worker, go to jail. Do you agree with that? Yes. I do too. And I think more states should do it. What they're saying there is if you're at fault, you hit a construction worker, you're going to jail. And you're going to pay a lot of money typically, right? Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff that we're trying to do. The fact of the matter is there's been a 50% increase in work zone fatalities over the last 10 years. We've got more congestion. We've got more cars on the roads. You don't see the number of new roads being built out there as compared to what? Maintenance of existing roads. So we've got a situation out there. It's not getting much better here. I'm going to talk about some critical liability issues. I'm going to highlight these things. I'm going to pop through them fairly quickly, but the point here is to get you to understand how the cards are stacked against you and why you have to be able to protect yourself. There's a lot of liability issues out there that we got to get on the same page with. I'm going to talk about standards and written plans. I'm going to bring one slide in on OSHA. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, was put in place for the protection of who? The workers. Well, that's worker injuries. That's not general liability. Do you think that things cross over sometimes? They definitely do. Sovereign immunity, some contractual issues, limitation of liability. This is all fun, ugly stuff we're going to talk about, right? Exciting stuff. I'll do it quickly. Now, work zone standards, right? The current version of the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, 2003, National Federal MUTCD. Part 6 has to do with temporary traffic control, correct? Everyone familiar with the MUTCD? Okay, it's the Bible, right? It's the book on a national standards aspect that comes into play anytime you're dealing with temporary traffic control. It's the national standard. It's law. Now, you've got the federal. You've also got state supplements. How many of you are in states that have a supplemental standard? Okay, a lot of you. I just happened to I threw the Illinois one in here because it's the last place I was doing some of this. So not only do you have the federal, you've also got the states that might have made some slight modifications. The state supplement is always going to be at least as stringent as the federal. At least it's supposed to be. But you're going to maybe have some differences, some tweaks, some nuances to that state that you've got to be very aware of. It's critical that the standards are followed. If they're not followed, you've got to document why. And does it occur where you can't follow the standards to the T? Is that reality? So the reality is you better be able to demonstrate why and what you did to meet the intent of the standard if you can't follow it to the T. Okay? But these are critical here. I talked about OSHA. This is an actual different contractor we work with. Just earlier this year, they had a road job going on, and they got nailed by OSHA. There was 14 serious violations, only $4,500 in penalties for that contractor, and all of these violations were under this category. All traffic control signs or devices did not conform with Part 6 of the MUTCD. Traffic control is for worker protection as well, right? 2 serious violations, $4,500 again. Flaggers were used in a manner which did not conform to Part 6 of the MUTCD. What I'm saying here is that OSHA will reference the MUTCD because it is the governing standard. Now, when I'm talking liability, if this is on the history of that contractor's OSHA, OSHA fines, penalties, do you think it's going to get used if a bad accident happens on that work site? I can guarantee you it's going to be used. It's public record. My God, you just got creamed by OSHA here for all these allegations. Now we had someone get killed in your work zone a month later. Not a good situation, right? There's some chairs. If you want me to, I'll stop for a second. If you guys want to sit down. If there's kind of sprinkled, you good? Okay. I hate standing, so, Now here's the issue. Someone else draws up the plans, right? Typically, the big job, who's actually drawing up the traffic control plan? You are. Who are you with? Are you? Okay, so you're doing your own traffic control design. Okay, got a DOT job. Who's doing the design? Okay, DOT. Okay, I mean, it's going to vary all over the place. The point is, it doesn't matter who designed it. It doesn't matter who put it together. It doesn't matter who inspected it. You can't just say, as a contractor doing that project, that the state designs it, hands off, we're going to do exactly that. You can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because you're liable. What's going to happen when the lawsuit comes in? Here, Mr. General Contractor, you're going to deal with this now. Have you seen where traffic control plans and specifications aren't correct? Let me see the hands go up on that one. Okay, we've seen that there are errors that are made, and things need to be modified. So my message is you can't rely on that. You have to take it on yourself and make sure things are happening the right way. And you have to be able to show that you took your due diligence to make sure it was set up the right way. If it's not working, you're going to be held responsible. Now, this actually is out of the Illinois supplement, the supplemental standard, but it's a good message. Nothing in this chapter, meaning this is a chapter in the Illinois supplement, shall relieve contractors from the responsibility of properly placing, maintaining, and operating traffic control devices or implementing procedures. It's right in the standard. It's right in the supplemental standard that nothing in here relieves you as the contracting entity from making sure this happens right. That's what it's saying. DOT contract language. In the performance of this contract, the contractor shall comply with all federal, state, and local laws governing safety, health, and sanitation reasonably necessary to protect the life and health of employees on the job and safety of the public. This one clause in a contract just did what? It brought in federal MUTCD, it brought in state supplement MUTCD, it brought in local ordinances, it brought in everything that has to do with that work zone. And by contract, you are obligated to make sure you're complying with all that. You see where we're going here? You got a nail in the coffin here, you got a nail in the coffin here, here comes a big one, and I got a bunch more to talk about. Okay? The plan has to deal with everything. Private cars, pedestrians, bikes, trucks, emergency vehicles, railroad. It's got to deal with all aspects of that, and it's a challenging thing to do, and I acknowledge that. I think it's nearly impossible to have a 100% perfect work zone every day, every minute, every hour of the year. You got to do the best you can do as consistently as you can. The written plans. Authority having jurisdiction, like the DOT in this case, typically develops the traffic control plan. In other cases, the contractor is going to be required to develop and submit it, and it's got to be approved. Is that correct? Okay. The message here is complying directly with only the traffic control plan does not necessarily always mean you're in compliance with the standards, because a bunch of hands just went up when you acknowledge that we've seen problems with the traffic control plan. It's not working right. Have you seen actual violations in a traffic control plan as compared to what the MUTCD says? Okay, there's still quite a few hands going up, right? You got to make sure you're managing it. Who's going to hold the bag if it's not working? Contractors all the way down the chain are going to end up holding the bag. Okay? Where's the deep pocket? What do we mean by deep pocket? Who's got the money, right? Does the state have money? Is there a limitation on how much of the state's money you can get? Okay, we're going to talk about that. Comes down to it. If you're a large contracting firm, and I'm on the insurance side, you're going to have layers of insurance. You're going to have the 1 or 2 million up front on the general liability. You're going to have an excess policy that goes to 5 or 10. You're going to have an excess policy that goes to 25 or 50, depending on what you're dealing with. So the entity with all this insurance backing them is typically the contractors. There's a reason you get sought after. There's a reason you have a big bullseye on you. You're the deep pocket in a lot of cases. All right, let's talk about this. This is what I'm talking about with the state, with governmental agencies. And this is not bashing any governmental agency. This is just reality. There is what's called sovereign immunity. It applies to governmental agencies. It could be the state, the city, the municipality. It could be the DOT. And basically, it caps the maximum contribution, and this is a strong word, regardless of the actual percentage of liability. Example, if there was a glaring error in a traffic control plan that was designed by the state, this is going to be very important to the state because there's a cap on the liability piece that they're going to be stuck with. They range from state to state, and they're not enough. I live in Georgia. I thought I'd throw it up there. This is one of the higher limitations of liability. $1 million per person, $3 million per occurrence. That's high. We're going to talk about a $6 million lawsuit. Is it high enough? Maybe not. Anyone work in South Carolina? $300,000 per person, $600,000 per occurrence. That's not a whole lot, is it? Virginia, $100,000 per person. Or the maximum limits of any liability insurance policy that might be in effect. Alabama, $100,000 per person, $300,000 per occurrence. Illinois, $100,000 limit. Florida, tell me if I'm incorrect on this, it was the most recent I could find, $100,000 per person, $200,000 per occurrence. The message I'm telling you here is there's statutes, there's legislation in place that is going to protect the degree of involvement that could happen there from a state or governmental agency. It's going to come from somewhere else. The money's going to come somewhere. There's also what's called joint and several liability. Now, Florida repealed this, I believe, in the last, when was it? February last year. There's still states that have it out there. And to oversimplify what joint and several liability is, it's a legal theory. What it means is that, let's say you're involved in a work zone situation. You're the general contractor, you're a subcontractor, you're a subcontractor. And you're all at fault, okay, to some degree. In a state that has Florida used to, I believe, be a 1% trigger. Georgia used to be a 1% trigger. What I mean by that is you're all involved. Let's say you're found to be 10% at fault. You're found to be 40 and 50. But this happens to be a very small entity that doesn't have a lot of assets and not a lot of insurance. This happens to be a smaller entity that doesn't have a lot of assets or a lot of insurance. This happens to be the jumbo contractor that's got all kinds of assets and insurance, and they're only 10% at fault. What this theory says is that this entity could be the one selected by the plaintiff to basically pay the entire shebang. That's kind of scary, isn't it? There's a reason it's been repealed in a lot of states. There's a reason Georgia did it, Florida did it. Again, it varies all over the board sometimes. My message here is we can't rely on someone else to manage our potential liability. We've got to manage it ourselves because there is variation that you see. And the inspection frequency, and basically the consistency out there, right? From state to state, you're going to see a variation in how many documented inspections are required to be done by the state or the DOT or whatever the authority having jurisdiction is. You're going to see variances in it. In Illinois, I'm going to throw this one out there, Illinois is still a joint and several liability state, unless something's changed that I wasn't aware of. Now, in Illinois, there's a 25% trigger. And what the critical thing here is a defendant whose fault is determined to be 25% or greater compared to the plaintiff's fault is potentially going to eat the whole thing. That number is very important, right? If I'm the prosecuting attorney representing the spouse that just got killed, what am I going for? 25 on up, right? If we're trying to defend the contracting entity involved in that, what are we trying to go for? 24 or less. Now, you're not going to be 100% perfect all the time, but the more you can show a pattern of due diligence, inspection, correction, and you're able to prove that, it's going to give you better legs to stand on to hopefully get to the 20% rather than the 50%. Because once that happens, it opens up a whole other potential for you as far as liability goes. Does that make sense? We got to do the best we can because these numbers are playing into it. So it comes down to the deep pocket really drops down to you as the contracting entity. And I'm not saying no one else has liability, but those entities are the ones that typically get brought in the hardest. Couple real quick bullet points on contractual issues. Just make sure we're all on the same page. Typically, you're going to have a contract in place between, let's say, the DOT and the general contractor. Okay? There's going to be subcontractors potentially involved. Are you a traffic control sub? Are you a seating? Are you a grading? Are you a milling? Whatever it might be. And in every one of those contracts that are typically executed, they're going to have what's called indemnification, additional insurance, additional insured status, and limits of insurance that are required to be in place by that lower tier entity. The state requires certain things of the general, and then it goes down the chain. This is important because everyone gets brought into it, so management of subcontracts, management of this whole situation is very critical. Contract language, again, ties in the fact that you got to follow all the standards here. Contract language is also going to typically have something that looks kind of like this, an indemnification clause, which means that me, as either the general, or it could be the DOT, or it could be a lower tier sub that is further subbing work out, I'm going to require anyone below me to indemnify and protect me in the event something happens by contract. And that's typical language. To the fullest extent permitted by law, you've got to protect me from and against claims, damages, loss, including attorney's fees arising out of the work. Classic indemnification clause. Insurance. I'm going to require lower tier entities, if I'm a higher tier, to maintain certain levels of insurance. Workers' compensation, statutory. General liability, certain layers of insurance. And what I'm going to do is require you to name me as an additional insured on your insurance policy. Which means what? Something goes south, I'm handed the lawsuit as the general contractor, I go to the subcontractor, what is that going to do with that contractor's insurance? Tap me directly into it. And their carrier is going to be defending me. So this contractual stuff is very important. It just funnels all the way down. And it's tough. How many primarily entities here act as subcontractors? You guys are trying to get everything pushed down on you that could possibly be pushed on you, right? And you got to make business decisions, but the reality is it's going to get handed to you. Now, there is some legislation in place that can offer some assistance here. I'm going to show Texas, I'm going to show Florida, because they're very, very similar. It's a limitation of liability statute. And don't worry about all the words, but basically it's for contractors. What it's saying is that a contractor who's doing work, this happens to be Texas, for TxDOT, is not liable to a claimant for bodily injury, property damage, death, all that stuff, if at the time of the personal injury, property damage, or death, the contractor is in compliance with contract documents material to the condition or defect that was the proximate cause of the personal injury, property damage, or death. What that's saying is, by law, it's legislated. If you're doing a TxDOT job, if you're in compliance with all the standards, the contract specs, everything, you are going to be held not liable. What word should scare you? What one small word in here, if. If at the time of the accident you're in compliance. My question is, how are you going to prove that you were in compliance? How are you going to prove you were in compliance when the last formal documented inspection was done by the state 5 days before the fatality occurred? Is that going to do it? It's going to help, but it's not going to do it. You need to be able to show that you're in compliance as best as you can right before the accident happened. Now, Florida has almost the exact same language. They clarified it a little bit more, and they said that this limitation of liability does not apply when the cause of the death is a latent condition, defect, error, or omission that was created by the contractor, or when the cause was the contractor's failure to perform, update, or comply with maintenance of traffic safety plan as required by the contract. They're further defining it, going, you know what? This will work if you can prove you're in compliance, and you will not be held liable. That's a huge if It's very difficult to do. You've got to do your best to be able to show that you were in compliance. Okay? Comes down to inspection, right? How many of you are actually involved physically in inspecting work zones? With those hands that went up, how often are you making corrections to work zones? Daily? Hourly? Weekly? Significant corrections? Sometimes? What do you do when you make a significant correction? You do what? You document it. That's the question I'm getting at, because what I found way too often is we're out there doing a lot of good stuff, and we're not taking credit for it. We had to replace 12 barrels on this because a semi just blew by and crushed them all. And it's not documented. That kind of stuff shows a pattern of inspection, correction, maintenance. James, I'm going to ask you, because you've been expert witness, you testify, right? How critical is that? The pattern of inspection, correction, and the documentation behind it. Can be critical. And the reason I keep emphasizing pattern is because not only is it important to show that you did something just prior to the accident or as close to the accident time as possible, but to show that that's your process. That's the way you manage stuff, is you do it regularly. You do it all the time. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Every day, maybe more than once. What about weekends, nights, holidays? Anything damaged, dirty, displaced, or missing? Document the inspections. Document corrective actions. Document when you can't do something that you feel is appropriate for that work site condition because you aren't allowed to. It's very challenging because you're trying to show due diligence. How many entities are involved in photos and video of work zone situations? Can be very, very helpful if you do it the right way and you know what you're doing. It's a big message I'm pushing to a lot of our road contractors is you got to take the bull by the horns, you got to get people trained in how to do this stuff, and you got to videotape. You got to take pictures. When you set up a lane closure, you got to drive through the thing and show that you had all the advanced warning in place. You had the taper set up properly. You had the number of devices that should have been there. Because if an accident happens after that, that is going to be so valuable to that case to show that it was set up properly. It's going to give you some legs to stand on to defend yourself. Now, I'm going to just real quickly grab Arizona. They actually spell out inspection requirements, and it varies from state to state. You know, routine day and night inspections of all traffic control plan elements should be conducted. Someone who's experienced should be regularly inspecting and documenting the work site. The individual responsible for the temporary traffic control should have the authority to halt work. That's usually there. The message here is that there's guidelines and there's requirements that vary from state to state as to what is actually physically required for documentation. I'm going to pass out some examples here. Here's the first time I'm going to pass out things. I'm just going to pass out a variety of inspection. I'll just run this one over here. It's a variety of inspection forms, and some are from different states. Some are just from, the AGC has one. Just go ahead and take one and pass it around. We're not going to go through these in detail. I'm giving you as examples because what I've found is that there's too much reliance on what the state requires. And if the state only requires a certain documented inspection every 2 weeks, night and day, it's not enough. So what are you doing to manage it yourself? Do you have your own internal daily inspection form? Do you have maybe a more elaborate weekly or monthly? What are you using to document all this stuff? So those are some examples that might be pretty valuable. In Illinois, got Illinois folks in here, there's a requirement for surveillance. IDOT requires that surveillance is done, and this is geared toward when the work is not actually happening. So what I see typically happening is the contracting entity, if they're doing daytime work, they've got people out there. They'll subcontract out surveillance. That happens at night, over the weekends, and there's a specific form that IDOT requires. Now, what scares me is I was doing some training up in Illinois, and I'm going, okay, I happen to be with a general contractor. So you're hiring somebody to do this surveillance. Yep. So what happens with these forms? They go to the DOT. And I said, do you see them? What do you mean? How often do you see the forms? Well, when there's a problem, I'm going, you're hiring somebody and paying them to do this, and you're not seeing the work product? Why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want the surveillance to show patterns of good inspections and to make darn sure that if a deficiency is noted, it's corrected? Because you need to take the bull by the horns. It's going to vary all over the board as far as what the state requires. So what projects do you inspect? Who does it? How often? What's recorded? Who reviews it? Who makes sure it's corrected? What kind of format are you using? A daily log? Daily logs come out very heavily in litigation. Any written documentation is going to come out. You got to train people on how to document. Are you doing photos or video? And this I hear way too often. Well, the resident engineers out there every day. They're doing the inspection. Why do you saying we need to take this on? Why do we need to do the inspection? We've got people out there that are doing it all the time. It's a good process. I'm saying it's not always enough. In Georgia, there's a specific form that's got to be completed by the supervisor, the work zone traffic control supervisor, once per week. Once per week is a requirement, and the problem is that's all an entity will do, is once per week. And that scares me. Because what happens if you do that on a Wednesday and a fatality accident occurs the next Tuesday? You've had 6 days go by with no formal documented inspection. How are you going to show that you're in compliance with the plan? How are you going to show that it was set up properly when and if that individual got hurt or killed? That fatality I talked about before, the March 28th fatality, this is actually from the DOT inspection logs. I took the information out, and this is not bashing the DOT, okay? The reason I show this is in this case, it basically shows the date, all this kind of stuff, what they did, the activity. There's a note. There was an accident on the blank bridge eastbound. A vehicle struck the concrete rail placer in the work area. All traffic control signs in this area were up and functioning. The attorneys working on this case that are representing our client were so glad when they got this. And I saw it and I went, ugh, not good enough. I'm going, this is what they're relying on? Is it positive? It is positive. It's not negative, right? But I'm going, this is what we're hanging our hat on? I'm going, no, you need this. Then you also need the contractor's documentation. You need the photos. You need the video maybe. You need the daily inspections that all track with this. Because the one thing I couldn't scan, because it wouldn't be visible here, is the police report. We talked about that earlier. What do you think the police report says? Appears that there was inadequate traffic control in front of the equipment, basically. What did that do? That just completely contradicted this. Okay? We have a problem here. There's an issue. You need to be able to sway it one way or the other. And you want to sway it to show that you had inspected it and everything was set up properly. You can't rely just on this. Does anyone do video? Okay. Are you videoing? Well, he does video back there. How often are you videotaping lane closures? Who's doing videotaping? Okay, so once the lane closure is set up, you're going to videotape it. Is anyone doing frequent videoing? How often? Okay. There's entities out there that have processes in place that it's 3 times a day. Start a shift, midday, end a shift. They have people dedicated to it. They're driving around with the dash-mounted cameras, just like law enforcement would use, and they're driving through the thing. And if there's a problem, they're correcting it, and they're driving it again. And the reason they're doing that is because the liability is way too great not to do it. And they've been nailed before. And they've been in bad situations. So that's why this is becoming more and more common. I'm going to throw this in here. Truck-mounted attenuators, there's interesting stuff going on with video. There's a company, I'm going to show a video clip here. It happens to be called DriveCam. But there's technology out there where you've got cameras that have like it's basically a buffer memory, for lack of a better word. And these cameras are activated when there's a G-force event, meaning an impact, a hard braking, a swerving, anything like that activates the camera. And because of this buffer memory, that camera, when it was activated, captures about 10 seconds prior to being activated. So it kind of like takes you back in time, and it's really cool. We're actually having discussions about possibly placing some of these cameras on the back of these things because they get hit all the time. They get hit all the time, and it'd be nice to document who hit them and exactly what happened. And so this is the kind of thing that we're looking at. Maybe it doesn't make sense to do. This is actually a shuttle bus. And what this is there's a camera facing out the front of the shuttle bus. There's a camera facing back at the driver. And there's an accident that happens. I just think it's kind of interesting because it kind of shows you where this is going from a liability standpoint. Everything's going on great. Now, right there, a lot of companies are looking at this stuff because you've got then documented evidence of what happened. I mean, this is where this stuff is going because it has worked, and it continues to work if it's done right. So, any questions on that? Basically, hopefully, I've hammered the message home enough, which is what? Don't you hate that word? But you got to get good and consistent at documenting. And this, I'm talking pre-incident. Real quickly, I'm going to show some pictures post-accident because that is very critical as well, what you do post-accident. I've got a contractor that has a team. It's a third party. They're attorneys and accident reconstructionists. They're notified that there's been an accident in their work zone. It's kind of like the hotline. These guys show up on the site. They got the attorney there. They're taking witness statements. They're actually doing all the video, the pictures, everything to document the entire situation as quickly as they can. And they work in an area where the response time has been about 45 minutes, which isn't bad. In that 45 minutes, what already happened, though? A lot of things changed, right? So the message here is it's important post-accident, more important pre-accident. But what are your on-site supervisors been trained in? What are they? Have they been trained adequately in what to document, what to do right after an incident occurs? Have they been trained in all these issues here? If you have third-party response, how quickly is it? I work for an insurance company, and I'm telling you, don't rely on the insurance company. And that's not I'm bashing insurance companies. I'm saying when an accident happens, by the time it's notified, the employer's notified, by the time it comes into the system, we have a rapid response protocol where we respond very quickly. But if it's the next day, you're going to lose it, right? And that's pretty darn quick. You've got to take it on yourself. Here's a real quick scenario. Small job, replacing 50-foot of bridge. Okay? North and southbound lanes are separated. This is a bridge situation. You're going to close one outside lane northbound. A driver in the right lane does not transition safely through the taper. They're trying to beat that vehicle. At the last minute, they swerve over, hit the vehicle on the inside lane, forcing them off the bridge, and there's a fatal accident. Basically, this type of traffic control setup. We've got a lane closure. This driver comes across here at the last minute. There's an impact here. The vehicle actually goes off the bridge, and there's a fatality. You've got all these elements of the work zone. What are generally going to be the most critical elements to show that you properly warned that driver of what's coming up? Advanced warning is going to be extremely critical. The length of your taper is going to be critical. The number of devices, the placement, the visibility. All of this right here is going to be huge. The problem I've seen post-incident is where do people focus with their photos? You focus right there. And what my message is you got to get people trained to go back, 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 back. Okay? I'm going to blow through this one. Everything's going to get questioned afterwards. The visibility of your workers is going to get questioned. You've got to have this mindset that once something goes wrong, especially if it goes to trial, you're going to be put on the stand. You're going to be deposed. You're going to be questioned on everything. The size, the visibility of all your devices. Were the chevrons actually pointing the right way? You know what I mean? If we're driving up to that sign, which way am I supposed to go? Left. Does it matter if it's reversed? It will matter if it's reversed when it goes to trial. Jersey barriers, K-rail, whatever it is. Is it important that they're pinned? Okay. Is it important that they have attenuation? These are big nails here. This is a bad accident. I'm going to show some more pictures here. When I saw these from the attorney, the question I asked is, was it pinned? Because if it wasn't pinned, we wouldn't have a tractor trailer potentially that went over that thing. We could have, but it's going to come out. Was it properly set up? Was everything connected right? So that it acted in the manner it was supposed to act? Did you have any kind of aero panels, light boards? Did you have them set up right? Did you have the devices in front? Everything's going to get questioned after an accident. Advanced warning is going to be critical. I don't care what kind of project it is. It's going to be critical. We need to get people looking at that. If you got people taking photos, investigating, what did the driver see? What devices are still in place? What was displaced due to the accident? Any damage to the traffic control devices? Don't focus on the crash site. I'm going to pop through a few photos here real quick. This is a bad one. This was not a fatality. A 5-year-old kid not in a seatbelt got ejected and is messed up. This is in a contractor's work zone. These are the photos I got from afterwards. And it's important to take up close pictures of the damage, right? And in fact, this was very important. They took pictures of the tires because one tire was different than the other 3. This stuff will play into why that vehicle maybe went out of control. So you got all those photos. You got this tractor trailer that hit that vehicle, swerved, went up over the railing, and did not get killed, but this is going to get questioned. Okay? The person stepped back because you've got swerving. You've got all this stuff going on, so they wanted to document that. This is very good. You've got damage to the attenuator. That is the farthest they got back. That is the one picture I found that actually was the furthest back from the accident scene. What did this not capture? No advance warning, nothing. Okay? Message is back way up. Video if you can. Because if it's in place after the accident, and that tracks with what you're showing was in place prior to the accident, you have so many more legs to stand on to say that this was not our issue. This was a driver issue. That's the whole message here. Last thing I'm going to do here, and I apologize, we're running out of time. This is me gabbing. I'll let you read this. $6 million work zone case, settled out of court. I'm not going to go through this. I'll let you read it on your own. But what we had here essentially was 40-minute work zone. These were pictures that were shown to 3 different mock juries. There were 3 mock trials set up because they wanted to see should this go to trial or not. And they decided not to. They settled out of court. We had a head-on collision here. We had a double lane closure. Gentleman going this way, didn't make it through the transition, hit a van head-on. That's what it looked like at night after the accident scene. This is what the jury was shown. Does anything look confusing to you? Does anything look out of place? You can't tell what's going on, right? Is this favorable for the contractor? No. This doesn't look quite so bad. Anyone see any problems there? Oh, yeah. It would help if you weren't in the way. We got problems there. That's the accident scene. We have a mother who is taking care of her 24-year-old kid who was messed up for the rest of his life. One jury thought that the damages were equal to $20 million. Another one came up with like 18, and another one came up with 10. They settled for $6 million out of court, and this was considered a huge success. There was a ton of stuff in place. Read through that document, and the last page are the pros of the case and the cons of the case I pulled directly out of the claim file. And you'll see a pattern of the cons. Lack of documentation, lack of inspection. We had other accidents on the roadway. The message is don't let it bite you in the rear. Look at that thing, take some proactive actions, get the videoing going. The last thing, I'm not going to talk about this, but I thought it might be valuable. After an accident occurs, what are some critical things you need to do? And I actually set this up for our claim people, going, this is the stuff you need to ask. Okay? So it's just something as a reference tool.